Basu Godin Notebook. 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 Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Basu and Godin Notebook. We're Friday, February 27th. I am Marc-Antoine Godin. This over there is Arpin Basu. Arpin, how are you, my friend?
Good. Friday. Feeling
Finally,
it doesn't feel like Friday. I still don't know what day of the week it is. I'm still admittedly on Olympic kind of fog. But the Canadiens are back in action. They've played a game. They have another game on Saturday, but they played against the New York Islanders yesterday, so we have a Canadiens game to talk about, and we're going to talk about it.
Did they know which day of the week it was? Were they?
I'm going to be honest. I think there were 6 Olympic guys playing in the game, 4 for the Canadiens, 2 for the Islanders. I would say those 6 guys weren't at their best. You could look at each of them and be like, they could have been better. And Texier's been back for a while. I think maybe it doesn't apply to him, but Kapanen, Slavkovsky, Demidov had one of their worst games in a while.
Yeah. I think Suzuki, despite the fact that he made some mistakes, I thought he had a great game.
I thought the mistakes were uncharacteristic, though. They might be related to some brain fog. The brain fog that you and I are feeling, they must be feeling. They have to be. There's no way. We didn't even play in the Olympics. We just watched them. So there has to be some correlation between how we feel today and how they feel today. And it has to be worse on their end, you would think, because we're both out of sorts. We both don't know what day it is. They surely don't know what day it is. So yeah, I think there's something to that. I don't think Bo Horvat was at his best for the Islanders, and Palat is, I don't know what Palat's best looks like anymore these days, but he wasn't. Well, he made the key play. He made the key play to get the puck going in the right direction and get their goalie out of the net. So credit for that. But
I told you the other day that I would be paying attention to Nick increasing his pace based on the experience at the Olympic Games. And that's why I feel I saw against the Islanders. Like,
he definitely had bursts. He definitely had bursts. For sure. But I think it'd be normal to expect a more wire to wire version of Nick. There were also pockets in that game where he wasn't at his best and he did make poor decisions and he didn't really I don't think those guys were playing with the clearest of minds. And I can literally, just judging by my own state of mind covering that game, I think I can understand why. So I get it. It's and the whole team having not. So I think we have to, all this to say that I think we need to avoid making too much of this game, right? But having said that, blowing the lead late, having another game go to overtime when they had a chance to win in regulation, getting it scored again at 6-on-5. Like, these are all things that predate last night's game. And that's the issue, right? Is that it's fine. Last night might be a one-off in the sense that everyone was a little rusty. The Olympic guys were a little brain foggy. There's all sorts of factors that go into what happened last night. But because we've seen what happened last night on numerous occasions before, it's worth digging into, because it wasn't just last night. This has happened multiple times, and I hate when I get an idea really late at night after a game, but I had literally 20 game summaries open on my computer last night at midnight of all 20 overtime games, and going one by one through them. What was the score? What happened? And so last night was the 10th time that they had a third period lead and the game went to overtime. So that's they didn't lose all 10 of those games in overtime. So they got 2 points in some of them. But still, and the fact that they're so good at 3-on-3 overtime helps them, but that's not the case in the playoffs. And the Canadiens have reached a point where They have to start worrying about the things that can get them through the playoffs. And this is clearly one of them. This is something that playoff teams that have success in the playoffs don't do generally.
Yeah.
They have a 1-goal lead with 5 minutes left in regulation. They're able to lock it down more often than not. The Canadiens don't.
Well, the in the recent past, if you look at 5 of their last 6 losses, there were 5 games where they were in the lead, either in the second or third period, and eventually lost it, either regulation or overtime. But there's a bit of a trend, and it goes back to mid-January, that game in Washington where they were ahead, not necessarily dominating, but they had the upper end in the first 2 periods. And then arriving in the third, they was just completely gassed. The Capitals came back and they won.
That's the Ethan Frank game.
That's it. They won 3-2 in overtime.
Game, yes.
Then next game against Buffalo, Canadiens take the lead early in the second period. Buffalo ties it 5 minutes later, and they scored 2 more in the third period. That's a loss. In Boston, on the 24th, they had the lead after 2, and they gave up 2 goals in quick succession rather late in the third period, and they lost 4-3. Against the Wild on just before the break, against the Wild on February the 1st, not too dissimilar from what we saw last night. Montreal takes the lead in the third. The other team ties it. Canadiens lose in OT. So that's 5 of the last 6 losses where the Canadiens had an opportunity to hold on to a lead, making sure that the game doesn't go to overtime, because those regulation wins is one column where they're really vulnerable and where they really have a serious investment in making sure that, you know, they just don't just sneak into the playoffs, but more quote unquote comfortably, because otherwise if you get into the tiebreakers, that could hurt them. So it's not just yesterday. There's a recent trend behind it. I know that Marty likes to talk about the fact that they are a young team that's learning how to play with the lead, but I assume that there has to be more than that. Just the fact that the inexperience, and they have not been in that situation all too often.
Well, okay, first of all, for the 6-on-5 stuff, they played, I believe it was something like 50. They've played 50 something minutes at 5-on-6 last season. Mm-hmm. And did far better when the opposing team pulled their goalie than they have this season. The other thing is, so I looked when I mentioned that I had 20 tabs open with game summaries from 20 games last night. So 10 of those games all season, they went to overtime after holding a lead in the third period. They gave up the tying goal in the third period at some point. Doesn't have to be like late in the third period, but at some point in the third period, they were leading and they gave up the tying goal. I took the shot totals from the third period of each of those 10 games where they blew a lead, and cumulatively in those 10 games, they're outshot 94-55 in the third period.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's sitting back big time.
I mean, it's a 10-game sample, right? And I'm cherry picking 10 games that they blew leads in. So obviously it would stand to reason that you've been outshot in those periods. If you're giving up a goal and you're giving up more goals than you're scoring because you had a lead at one point, you're going to be outshot. But to be outshot by nearly 40 shots in 10 periods of hockey is a lot, And so there's, score effects. There's all sorts of study that's been done on score effects, and score effects are a real thing, right? And when you have a lead, every team has a natural tendency to give up more shots than you take. It's normal for the team who's trying to come back in the game to take more risk, to have some more recklessness in their game, to be a little bit more dynamic, to try to skill it up a bit more than you normally would. Just as there's a natural tendency for the team with a lead to dumb it down, to avoid skilling it up, get pucks deep, get on the forecheck, and do all the things that will lead to you either preventing a goal, but more so, if you're doing it in a smart way, preventing a goal by actually possessing the puck, as opposed to preventing a goal just by going into a shell and trying to take away the middle and make sure everything comes from the outside. And as we saw in the tying goal last night, making sure everything comes from the outside is a good principle, sure, but sometimes that bites you. And that Bo Horvat shot came from the outside, except when you have like a mammoth of a man in front of the net who was a permanent fixture there all night. I mean, he was the one who was there on Matthew Schaefer's second, all his career. Yeah. But, the Matthew Schaefer's second goal was just a dizzying display of skating and his ability to his elusiveness and everything that makes him good. He showed it off on that play, but the reason his shot beat Montembeault is because he had no idea where it was, because he had a huge curtain in front of him named Anders Lee. So that's 2 of the 3 Islanders goals. Well, no, 2 of the 4, I guess. So where Lee had a direct impact on it. But point being is that, you can't, the Canadiens need to find a better balance. And Marty obviously didn't like what happened. And I would think that if he went back and looked at and watched the media availabilities of the guys after the game, I don't think he would have liked what he heard either, because each guy was given ample opportunity to be like, we can't keep doing this. This is not acceptable. If we're going to be a real playoff team, we need to, and almost all of them chalked up the tying goal to a bad bounce, to a man. Yeah. They all said that we need to be better, but there was always a but. But in the end, that goal was going high. That shot was going high. It was going to miss the net. It hits a guy in front and goes in. What are you supposed to do? And it's like, yeah, there's a lot of things you could do. You could block that shot for one. You could be in that shooting lane. You could avoid giving the Islanders an opportunity to pull the goalie to begin with by just having the puck in the Islanders' end. There's all sorts of things you could have done to avoid that bad bounce, and they didn't.
That's one play, right? That's a result explanation, but the process explanation is that all through the third period, they could have generated some kind of offense. They could have generated, a modicum of scoring chances, which they did not. And eventually you sit back and it's going to bite you. It's as simple as that. And, do you remember when we spoke to Kent, and he talked about compete, and that the fact that the team, he likes his team, but if they could notch up the compete level a little bit, he would like that. I feel like this is one of those situations where if you raise your compete level a little bit, and the eagerness to seal the deal and close the books on the opponent, I feel like this is a squandered chance that they had yesterday, and that they didn't pull it off. And you started mentioning the 6-on-5. Those are fascinating statistics. I mean,
I got more.
Usually the vast majority of teams, they end up over the course of the season scoring more goals when they're defending 5-on-6 than that they will give up. It's just that's the all or nothing thing. So right now, only 2 teams in the NHL have given up more than they've scored, and the Canadiens are one of them. They scored 9, they gave up 10. So, and no team in the NHL has given up more goals than they have.
No.
So,
not only that, but they've given up 10 goals on 5.19 expected goals against. So they've given up almost twice as many goals as the expected goals would suggest. When you go to expected goals against with the opposing goalie pulled, I mean, the Canadiens aren't great, but they're 8th worst in the league at 5.19 expected goals against. And if you do it as a rate stat, it gets even better because they've spent a lot of time playing with the opposing goalie pulled. And so, the expected goals against per 60 number, they go way further down. They're actually right middle of the pack in terms of how many chances they allow. Their issue, and this is going to feed all the people who are seething over Sam Montembeault's performance last night for whatever reason. But the Canadiens have the 5th worst save percentage in the NHL when the opposing team pulls its goalie. They are rocking a 796, which is somehow only 5th worst. But their save percentage when the opposing team pulls their goalie is 796. The only teams worse than them are Anaheim at 769, San Jose at 759, Winnipeg at 724, and Chicago at 667. But the difference, it's really quite bad. It's really quite bad. But the difference for each of those 4 teams is they don't spend nearly as much time protecting a lead and with the opposing team's goalie pulled. Like they don't have, so their sample size is much smaller. So basically every time they give up a goal, their save percentage is skewed in a way that's hard to recover from, right? So it's not an apples to apples comparison. You know, Montreal spent 46 minutes and 55 seconds this season defending against an opposing empty net. Chicago's at 25:05, Winnipeg's at 34:23, San Jose at 30:17, Anaheim at 25:48. And that number is a feather in Montreal's cap. You know, they're one of the top teams in the NHL in that number in terms of how much time they spent with the opposing net empty. Only Buffalo and Detroit have spent more, and that means that you're often in the lead late in the game, forcing the other team to pull their goalie. That's a positive. But their performance in that game state is far from positive. It's a big blemish on a lot of what they've been doing. And they have 24 games now to improve it. And again, don't want to make too much of that game last night. I don't think it's indicative of a lot of things, but this one thing is something that they now have 6 weeks to get right. And it's been a problem for a while. And, you know, it's interesting with the trade deadline coming up. I don't know if it's too early to segue, but with the trade deadline coming up, the last trade the Canadiens made was for who? Was for Phil Danault, right? So last night, Nick Suzuki has the puck in the offensive zone. Cole Caulfield's cutting back door to the net. He's pretty open, but not like wide open, but he's open enough that Nick tries a pass over there. It's a bit behind him. Caulfield can't handle it, and the Islanders are going the other way, and they pull their goalie at the same time as they're going up ice. But as they're going up ice, all the players on the ice who had already been on for a minute are now stuck defending this 5-on-6. The only guy to get to the bench was Caulfield. The guy who went on the ice for Caulfield was Danault. And so Danault was acquired for these situations, right? He was acquired to defend against an empty net in a 6-on-5 situation, to defend down a man on the penalty kill, and to basically help get this young, inexperienced team through third periods where they have a lead and to the finish line to defend that lead. And it's been 2 months since he's been with the Canadiens, you know, and it's only been like 6 weeks of gameplay, right? So it's not a fair 2 months because they've been off for a couple of weeks. But so far, at least, I don't feel like he's really delivering the goods on what he was brought in to do. I hate to say this. I love Phil, and I was happy for him that he got to come back here. But so far, at least, he has not been as advertised in terms of what he was brought here to acquire, to achieve.
Hold on to that thought regarding Danault, because we'll get back to him in a minute. I just want to end that segment on the 5-on-6 by mentioning two things. First, it's really ironic that when the Canadiens are trailing and there's 5 minutes left in the game, they really have instilled the feeling in everybody's minds that they're going to tie it. And so just as much as the statistics suggest that we're in the lead, when they're in the lead, they're vulnerable to the other team tying it. When they're chasing, they're a dominant offensive force, and they're going to tie this game. It's like inevitable. It's death, taxes, and the Canadiens tying the game. So I think that's an interesting dynamic at play here. And also, you gave up all those stats regarding the teams played 5-on-6 this year. Last year, everything was right? It was
they were last year.
But 2 years ago, the Canadiens were exactly among those teams that you mentioned, your Chicago's and your Anaheim, the rebuilding teams, right? Who don't get to necessarily play all that often with at 5-on-6 and defend leads late in the game. But 2 years ago, there were 3 teams who ended up with a minus record 5-on-6, and the Canadiens, chief among them, had 7 goals for and 13 goals against. That's, again, the 13, I think, was a league worse. Their expected goals against was 5.5. So, again, they gave up a lot more than they were supposed to. Their goalie, their save percentage was at .755. So, it's not an entirely new situation. It's like almost coming back to the way it was 2 years ago. So, yeah, it's still a young and experienced team that needs to learn how to protect leads. And they haven't been in that situation all that often in the past few years. But it's really echoing what we saw from that team 2 years ago. And I agree. They need to.
I think the big difference is now they lead they're third in the league in time on ice in that situation.
Yeah.
So if you're bad in that situation and you're in it that often, that's a problem. Like that year that you're talking about, Montreal had the 6th fewest minutes at 5-on-6 in the league. So yeah, they were bad at it. They were the worst in the league at it. But it wasn't very consequential for that team, right? It wasn't something that, it's not as consequential as it is for this team that has some aspirations. That team had no aspirations. This team's aspirations could very much be impacted by this weakness. And I think that's why I brought it to Danault, not to put it all on Danault, far from it. And really that save percentage number should tell you that it's not all on Danault. But I think it's worth talking about because I wonder, he's had, I don't have it in front of me, but he's played 20 odd games with the Canadiens, 15, something like that. Pretty decent sample size. And I know that Stefan Robida wasn't at practice today. You were, but he was talking about how they do things differently on the penalty kill and he needs to adjust and all this stuff. But, they brought in Danault for experience, and he himself said everyone basically plays the same. It's just little tweaks here and there. It shouldn't take me long to adjust. And here we are 2 months later, and the coach is still saying he needs to adjust. Do you think there's any part in either Kent Hughes or Jeff Gorton's mind, or in both of their minds, that this solution to this issue that we acquired is not sufficient, it's not working, maybe we need a plan B here? Because right now the plan B is Joe Veleno.
Yeah. No, I don't think that Joe is a plan B in this case. I think that he's an extra body and a guy that he's a 13 forward for them, and he should remain that way. But I think that the price they paid to get Danault, I think I don't put it just on Danault, because I'll package Danault and Evans together, because Evans not having a great season either.
No, and that's true.
And I think that the whole idea was to recreate a lefty-righty bottom 6 center line the way that you saw with Dvorak and Evans before. And it's not how it plays out. And if you are to have Danault winning face-offs, but basically being a modern version of Manny Malhotra or Jeff Alpern from years ago, then you pay too much. And I think that it becomes almost not redundant, but you're certainly not getting the most out of what you could have for what you paid. Or maybe that there was left in the tank for Danault than what they thought there was originally. And what it makes me wonder is that if Danault is your 4th line center and he's you bite the bullet and that's who he is, fine. And you You use him in certain situations on the PK for key face-offs. That's fine. But I find as though I feel as though Evans and Danault together is not as strong as it sounds for your bottom six centerman pair. So when you talk about the plan B, I'm starting to wonder if could Jake Evans be the one being moved, like at the deadline? If you want to give a different spin to your center line and give some more oomph on and find maybe even a third line centerman that would be more offensive inclined, and could you say, okay, fine, we'll finish with Danault till the end of next year. He's going to do what he does defensively, and after that, well, we'll turn the page. Instead of having Evans, who's more attractive because he's younger, he's signed long term at a much lower payday. There might be an attractive commodity there for other teams.
Perhaps. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, it's the reality is, I mean, that's the reality. And the thing, like right now, like, you know, last night Alex Newhook was playing on the line with Evans. They were taking strong side draws, so Newhook was taking the faceoffs on the left side. Pretty interesting looking fourth line or third line or however you want to qualify them, but it's, and they had Texier on the other side, and you know, it's, would they trade Evans? Maybe. I mean, listen, it's,
I don't know. It's not. I don't have any inside information. I'm just thinking out loud here. If you want to give a different look to your forward group, and you have too many bodies, and you're trying to find some solutions, that could be one. Because Alex Newhook came back last night, and what did we say about the beginning of his season? That he's played his best hockey, helped the team tremendously early on in the year. Well, he was playing center. He was he had a real good grasp of how his speed can help him defensively, and all the defensive hopes that Marty had for him, he was applying it on a daily basis. He was playing on the PK, but he was taken off the power play. Now he comes back. He's a winger. He plays on the PP, doesn't play on the PK. And a lot of that is because Danault was brought in. So it's ironic because you got all the conditions that enabled him to provide his best hockey to the Canadiens now have been taken away from him as he comes back.
Yeah. And that's a work in progress, right? You know, that was his first game back.
Sure.
I think getting him back on the penalty kill eventually, and I think getting Danault away from Evans on the penalty kill. I know Robida defended it today, but I would split them up. It's just it's not working. But when you talk about changing the dynamic, and it's interesting. I hadn't thought of the possibility of Evans moving until you mentioned it, and I still don't know how appetizing that would be to the Canadiens. It's a pretty good contract for what he brings. You know, it's a bit high for a fourth line player, but for a guy of his stature and experience and having playoff experience, like, it's not a bad number, right? And so, which would make him attractive on the trade market. I agree with you. But what if the other option is to accentuate the two guys you have by acquiring another bottom six winger with some of your excess NHL players that you have? And not to beat a dead horse, and this might not even be a possibility, but it brings me right back to Blake Coleman again. Is he available? What is the price on him? Is he willing to come to Montreal? He only has 10 teams that he only has a 10-team trade list, like as in 10 teams that are pre-approved for him to be traded to. It appears that Montreal is not one of those 10 teams, so it would take some finagling to get it done. But he also has one more year left at $4.9 million, which would match with Danault. But that's a lot of money in your bottom six. It's 5.5 for Danault and 4.9 for Coleman. But I wonder if bringing in someone with a competitive bent to him who can kill penalties and who can hit and be hard to play against, to augment that bottom six, if that would get more out of the group you already have in place, as opposed to moving one of them.
Well, he's an attractive player, but to me, I find that
he's just an example. Like, just philosophically, like, go get someone to help to improve that bottom six, as opposed to trading one of the centermen who are kind of underperforming right now on the bottom six, is the question I'm asking. Because going into the break, Danault, Anderson, and Gallagher were playing some pretty good hockey, and they actually had some really good shifts in that game last night.
Yeah,
they started that 2.5 minute shift in the offensive zone midway through the game. That was started by them. They had Anderson drew a hooking penalty because they were playing in the offensive zone. Like, they had moments, and heading into the break, they were kind of they were a momentum line, what Marty's always been seeking all year. And so it's really Evans that was last night and has been generally the underwhelming one of the two, in terms of 5-on-5 play and being able to sustain time in the offensive zone. And maybe he needs some help, and Newhook could be that help. But do you think that would be a worthwhile venture for Montreal to go out and look for either Coleman or someone that somewhat resembles Blake Coleman to bring in and play on the bottom six?
Well, the main issue right now is that they have so many bodies that my thing for a long while has been trading quantity for quality. Now that everybody's healthy, it's truer than ever. So you cannot just bring one more guy to help your bottom six, because as it stands now, you're scratching Bolduc, you're scratching Veleno. Laine is a thing of its own, but they've got a lot of guys. So technically, they should have enough guys in-house to, round out an interesting bottom six. If they don't have the proper mix, then use your surplus and go out there and get one. And maybe that's where a guy like Coleman can be interesting, because you're in a position maybe where you might be able to overpay. But generally at this time of the year, teams that will trade you interesting players are looking for futures, for draft picks. I don't think the Canadiens are really in this mode just yet. They would be looking more for a hockey deal. So if there's a team that's on the fence right now, that's neither a buyer or a seller, but says, maybe we could use a couple of extra of bottom six forwards or guys that we think could help us, and here's one of our own, and you just trade from positions of strength. Maybe that might be more doable than trying to sell one of your forwards or two of your forwards to a team that's actually looking to retool and shedding assets right now. So it's a very delicate balance, but it doesn't have to be Blake Coleman. A guy like Warren Fogle, to me, would be also a profile player that would be interesting to me. Bigger guy, can be on can play with an edge, can play on the PK. That's also, to me, an attractive name, but they have so many options right now that they have to sort out the number of players.
Well, yeah, and you talk about Warren Fogle. I mean, what are the Kings doing? It's hard to ascertain what the Kings would want, right? And so, but like when I talk about Cole, I mean that's the thing, is that I firmly believe that the Canadiens are in the market for a hockey trade. I believe Kent said as much on our show like weeks ago, right? I mean that's something that they would entertain, because they have the tools to do it, right? They used to be well stocked in futures, and they could shed futures and overpay with futures and to get a deal across the finish line. Now what they're well stocked in are players that they've drafted, and players who are on the cusp of being ready for the NHL. I think in many franchises, I would say at least half the franchises in the NHL, Owen Beck would probably be playing in the NHL right now, right? Like for a good number of teams, not playoff teams, but I think a decent number of teams, he would be an NHL player right now.
Yeah.
Engstrom for sure. I think 2/3 of the league, he'd probably be in the NHL right now. So you add the guys that can't get in the lineup in Montreal, and I'm not including Bolduc in this calculation because I don't think there'd be any interest for the Canadiens to trade Bolduc, even though he can't get in the lineup, or he couldn't last night at least. We take all the NHL ready or close to NHL ready players they have, and we mentioned this on the last episode when I did that Luke Tuck hypothetical. It's like it's how many guys do other teams, how many guys the Canadiens have that other teams view as being someone who could play in their lineup, whether they're in Montreal or in Laval. And so when you talk about this player profile, Coleman, Fogle, whoever it may be, these kind of depth, physical guys who can kill penalties and who can hit and play a playoff style hockey, who aren't necessarily the flashiest guys. When what do you need to go get that type of player? I think there are several teams who would be interested in getting NHL players in return, or players that they could plug into their lineup right away and sort of help the process a little quicker than a draft pick would.
Yeah. Well, the fact
I think at Calgary, like a team like Calgary, who are looking ahead to being competitive when their new building opens, like there's all these different timelines for these teams. Like those teams would rather have a player, because a draft pick could be a player and it could not be a player. Like you have no idea. So it's when you can actually give a projectable player in return. I think to some teams it's more attractive than getting a future, whereas there's a lot of teams who would rather have those draft picks and be able to monetize them or use them in any way they see fit. I think there's a lot of teams out there right now who would rather have players they can plug into their lineup.
Well, the trade commodities that are futures for the Canadiens, I think that they would rather wait and spend it or trade them when they're going to when those trades will help the Canadiens, push them, to the top. We're not there yet, not by a country mile, but now it's just keep improving the team. And when you look at what you've got now, it's just an abundance of guys that they've got. And you see you look at the rising salary cap. I think that with the cap going up so much, there's not going to be, because we're so used at every trade deadline to see there's buyers, there's sellers, who are the expiring contracts. Basically, the rentals are going the other way, and that's it. I expect that there's going to be more players traded that have term left on their deals. And and the Canadiens would be definitely a client for that sort of guy, where say, okay, there's 1 year left, there's 2 years left, bring it on, we can absorb it. Those new guys can be part of a bigger picture plan instead of just short-term fix and short-term goals that we want to attain. So the minute that you open yourself to acquiring guys that have terms left, the possibilities are that much more, and the potential fits are also more numerous. So when you talk about Coleman, who's not on an expiring deal, well, he's an interesting guy, but there's throughout the league, there's guys like that. And it doesn't have to be a selling team. You can do at any given time in the year, even at the trade deadline, you can do a hockey deal if it doesn't involve necessarily shedding a rental, a guy who's on an expiring contract. So that's what I would be looking for.
Yeah. Well, that's what the Canadiens are looking for. That's absolutely what they're looking for. But that's why I find it the Canadiens are in such an interesting spot, because they could also just leave it. They could just easily just leave it. Just leave it as is. Hope it and it does. It's not like it needs drastic improvement. The way we're talking makes it sound like the Canadiens are in dire straits, and they're not. They lost a hockey game, and they entered the break on a 4-1-1 run, if I'm not mistaken. So it's it's things are good, and if status quo remains, then so be it. Like, and that's the best position to be in as a team, is when you do not feel any pressure to do anything. And I think the Canadiens are in that sweet spot, because if you look at Detroit did not make the playoffs last year. They have not made the playoffs in a long time. Steve Yzerman has been the GM there for a long time. I think there's pretty heavy internal pressure in that market for Steve Yzerman to make sure the Detroit Red Wings reach the playoffs. They're in very good position to do so now. Mm-hmm. But I think there's and the fact that they were in on Quinn Hughes, I think shows that there's a certain understanding there that they need to speed things up a little bit. They've been on this train for a long time. Buffalo's similar in the sense that obviously it's been 14 years since they made the playoffs, but the teams around Montreal, I would say those two teams have more pressure to do something before next Friday than Montreal does. I don't know what Boston's thinking. I kind of feel like if I'm Boston, like if I were a Bruins fan, I'd be like, this is all gravy. Like we didn't expect to be in this position. This is great. Like, do they have to do something? I don't know, but they seem interested to do something.
Yeah.
And the Canadiens are in that sweet spot. Like they don't have to do anything. They could, if something good comes across their plate, but they could easily justify doing nothing, just as they did last year. But it would be a totally different circumstance, in the sense that, last year they were able to come up and say, well, what we did is we didn't trade this guy, this guy, and this guy, right? This year it's just, it's just like, you can easily come up to the mic if nothing happens between now and next Friday and say, we like what we have. We like the position we're in. We didn't want to use the assets it would cost to improve, and the market wasn't right for us. And so we're willing to go with what we have, and we feel good about it. And some people might complain in the market, but I think most people will be like, yeah, okay, fair. that's
oh yeah.
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the best, as far as being a GM or in management of a hockey team, that is the most desirable place you could want to be in, is where you could basically, whatever you do, you have a justifiable excuse for doing it, even if that means doing nothing.
Well, if you're the youngest team in the league and you're sitting, even after this last night's loss, you're sitting in the fourth position of your conference, and you're not in a position where you have to make a move. You can just stand pat. That's a good position to be in, because it means that for the future, you can say, well, we keep our powder to dry, and later on there'll be more opportunities. But again, the surplus of forwards is a little bit cumbersome. So unless there are injuries that come up, you'll have to rotate. You'll have disgruntled guys, and you'll have, if you wanted to create a dynamic where the chemistry on your lines is potent and it's somewhat durable to enter the playoffs, it's going to be harder to achieve if you have 14 forwards and you have to, potentially send one down on waivers, and God knows if they manage to find a taker for Laine. The minute that a team tells the agent, well, you can shop for your client by yourself and try to gauge the interest, it rarely works out. Who else in the league is in that position? I was wondering if Evander Kane is in this position, and is Dougie Hamilton in that position too?
Right now?
Yeah.
I don't know if they have permission. I mean, JP Barry has made it plain that he feels his client's not being treated fairly by New Jersey. I mean, that came out in the wash a while ago.
Yeah.
He still hasn't been moved. He's a far more movable asset or a player than Patrick Laine is. But I really don't think, just because Patrick Laine doesn't appear to have a fit here in Montreal does not mean that there are not teams out there who wonder if he could help them. Any team that's starved for goals and has and kind of an impotent power play would be tempted by this guy. He is like Mike Hoffman stayed in the NHL for a long time. And this guy is like an elite version of, like, he's like the ultimate he's the Mike Hoffmaniest player you could possibly imagine. Like he can single-handedly fix your power play. This guy.
Yeah.
To a far greater extent than Mike Hoffman ever could, you know? And so like I would not be surprised that there are teams who are wondering, who saw what Laine did when he was healthy last year, when he came back and literally turned Montreal's season around in his first 20 odd games, when he, scored 10, 12 goals in his first 20 games. And so it's like, I don't think he's as immovable an asset as we assume. And I think there's a market out there for him. It's just a question of whether the Canadiens are going to use him in an actual trade, or if they're going to pay something to unload his contract. I think those are the two things, as I've already mentioned on this show. I think those are the two possibilities here. The Canadiens are hoping for one, but if that doesn't materialize, they're probably prepared to do the other if need be.
Right.
And
right.
The question is, when do they do it? And then what do they do with the cap space it creates once they do it?
Right. Yeah, they better not wait until the last minute to move him. Yeah, it's just, I agree with you. I mean, he can help for sure. There are teams out there who have abysmal power plays, and he could certainly use the goals that he could provide.
I mean, that's why the Kings speculation came up, right?
Yeah.
But then they went and got Panarin, and then, but that's the type of team that I would imagine, wonder, can this guy score some goals for us? Like, we defend really well, but we need someone to get some goals in the other net. And so could he do that for us? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. At 4 point something million, for the rest.
It's a reasonable number. Yeah. Prorated, it's very reasonable.
Okay. Zachary Bolduc. Scratch yesterday. I think that obviously a player is always in the here and now. He's thinking of his spot in the lineup right now, what he can do to regain this spot and his place on the team today. But I think that there's a bigger picture when it comes to Zachary Bolduc, where when the dust settles and some of those older players move away, I think if you look long term, I wouldn't be concerned if I were him, but I cannot blame him to say, wait a minute, I've been moved all around, up and down that lineup, has struggled to play into his identity with the different line mates and whatnot. And now he's been the odd man out. It was sort of brewing since the last few games before the break. But now Newhook comes back and he's the one to pay for it. He's not, but I don't expect him, he might end up being in the same Struble Jacky situation where even if he's scratched, the head coach will say, we can't keep him out there, keep him scratched for too long, so we'll bring him in and scratch somebody else. But it's an unfortunate situation because Bolduc has gone through this last season in St. Louis, was scratched a bunch of times in the first half of the season. Then he got to rebound in the second half of the season, and it'd be nice if the Canadiens could benefit on that.
Well, the difference in St. Louis is that they changed coaches, and
which is not happening here.
Which is not happening here, exactly. So the previous coach, Drew Bannister, did not trust him at all. Jim Montgomery understood the assignment a little better than Bannister did, and played him. But it was really the return from Four Nations where Bolduc took off, right? And I was wondering during the break, I was like, could the Canadiens see a similar bump from Bolduc coming out of this break as the Blues did last year? Which is why I was somewhat surprised at practice Wednesday when it was obvious that Bolduc was going to be scratched for that game on Thursday. And so maybe that's just sort of a calculated way to send a wake-up call to him and be like, listen, you got to get going here, because if you don't get going, we've been pretty patient with you. He's played pretty consistently. He's been in every game, and has gotten pretty decent ice time, decent opportunities, and then he's gotten some shots on the top line. Needs to get it going. And that's, I think, an interesting time for the franchise of where they are. because there's no doubt that management views Zachary Bolduc as a big part of this team's future. They were pretty proud and happy to have been able to acquire this player last summer. But I think the days of Jeff Gorton wanting Sean Farrell to be in the lineup, like those days are over. Like the coach is going to put together the lineup that he thinks gives him the best chance of winning, and he's going to do that with the endorsement of, I would presume, of everyone in the organization. No one is going to question if a young, promising part of your future has to sit out a game or two because you feel the lineup that you put together without him gives you a better chance of winning. This is where they are. The Canadiens are not only playing to make the playoffs, although that's not a given, but it looks pretty safe, more or less. They have a chance at home ice in the first round, and it's highly competitive. They could finish anywhere from second in the division to second wild card, or to right out of the playoffs too. I mean, if it really goes south, but that race between the second wild card and second in the division is so tight. You have to keep winning, and it's really, if you're not contributing to a winning formula, then this decision, I think, should make it clear to everyone that if they're willing to scratch him, a guy that management went out and traded for, and who is widely considered to be a core piece, of sorts, maybe a secondary core piece, but a core piece nonetheless. That should light a fire under everyone, and I guess that's the intent. But doing a rotation that's not necessarily merit based, but that's more formulaic, I wouldn't suggest doing that either. But that means that they have to apply it evenly to everyone. Like, that's the only way that works. Is if you're doing it on merit and it's merit based, that has to apply to everyone. So, and that includes
to Brendan Gallagher.
Well, that's what it would have to. If for it to have any teeth whatsoever, it would have to. And not to say that he deserves to come out now. He's playing pretty decent hockey, but there have been times this season where we have talked about, and a lot of people have talked about, whether he should be in the lineup anymore, and it was never a consideration to take him out. So if this is the new way, it can't only apply to the young players or the players who are kind of seen as role players or that don't have a letter on their sweater. It has to be evenly applied. And that's going to be the challenge for Marty. When he mentioned, this is the first time I'm doing this, it's new to me, we're going to be learning on the fly, I think that's a part of it. Can you apply this fairly and objectively with every player, whoever that player is? And if a player that has some stature is not pulling his weight, then are you able to apply it to him just as easily as you were able to apply it to Zach Bolduc, who's only in his second year, and he just cleared the waiver eligibility barrier and is no longer waiver exempt. And so that's how young he is. But that's what I think, and if you're able to do that, then power to you. And then when the time comes, do it. For now, they've done it fairly to Bolduc. He hasn't produced, and he's a goal scorer, and he hasn't scored. I think his last goal was on December 23rd, if I'm not mistaken, in Boston. So it's a fair thing to apply to him, but I think I'm curious to see who the next person might be that it applies to, and if it's only Alex Texier that it applies to, then I don't know how valuable that is.
No.
And it is December 20. His last goal was December 23rd, just for the record.
Good on you for knowing it on top of your head. I'm so bad at that stuff.
I mean, I wrote about it on Wednesday, so it's not that. Okay. It's not that impressive. Yeah,
but
we should have known it more surely, considering I wrote about it 2 days ago. So
right, but it's interesting to mention that Nick Suzuki, when he came back, his first practice on Wednesday, coming back with the team, he looked around and says, "I've never seen so many NHL caliber guys on the team as right now." When looking at the number of healthy guys and the proverbial internal competition, that's really turned up a notch. it's uncharted territory for everybody. We had hints that it would happen at the beginning of season. It was a talking point. It did not last, but when you have that so late in the season, when the stakes are higher, the level of play has increased compared to what it was in October, and you have all these options that you can choose from. Now you have a better understanding of what your team needs in order to succeed, and so who do you pick among all those guys? But Bolduc and all that, for all his warts and his up and downs, he's an easier target. Just like Joe Veleno, to be scratched is an easy target. But
yeah,
I would. It's yeah. That's all I got to say.
That's why Texier is an easy target too. I mean, that's the point, is that you can't just pick the easy targets. You got to pick the guys who genuinely deserve to take a rest. And that's Kirby Dach was talking about it the other day, and he's he doesn't feel safe in his spot, even though he's on the top line right now. He doesn't feel like it's set in stone and that it's safe. Like he knows that if he doesn't bring the goods, someone else is going to get a shot in that chair, and that could mean going from the top line to right out of the lineup for all he knows. Like he was really quite conscious of it and spoke, pretty bluntly about it. He's like, there's good players, there's good talented players that are not getting into our lineup right now. So that means we're all at risk. Like it's the internal competition is at its highest it's ever been. And, I guess that's my one. It's a positive until it can become a negative if I think if the room views it as being applied unfairly.
Mm-hmm.
That's the risk. Like internal competition is great, but if you're applying certain rules to certain players while other players are exempt just because of status or years of service or whatever metric you decide to apply somewhat arbitrarily, that's where I think it can be tricky, and that's part of the learning process, I think, for Martin St. Louis. But having been a player and having had to manage a room, veteran rooms, these are real elements that need management. And I agree with you that Bolduc was a bit of an easy target, but aside from Texier, I don't see anyone else who's an easy target on the team. So if it's not Texier, it's gonna create waves. The next person to sit out, and so, but that could be beneficial. But I think this is another. I think this situation being what it is. Remember when Ken Hughes spoke to us at midseason? You asked him, "What are you going to do if everyone's healthy?" He's like, "Well, first off, we'll see if that ever happens." Well, here we are. It has happened. So, yeah. And he said at the time, if it does happen, we might have to do something.
Yeah.
And so there's a week from the deadline. What he said might never happen has happened. Let's see what happens in the game tomorrow against Washington. But for now, they are perfectly healthy. Patrick Laine might be on IR, but the guy's healthy. So, I mean, it's like there's something might give here. And I think eliminating the potential for what I just described might be another motivation for Ken Hughes and Jeff Gorton to go out and make this situation a little easier on his young coaching staff.
Yeah, well, it's when you have a young player like Bolduc who deserves to play, when you have guys in the American League that could get a sniff at the NHL and you wouldn't blink, they would be legitimate to have a shot at it. I think that's when you need to start considering turning quantity for quality, because heck, you mentioned Doc. Why not shoot for the moon and try to find that winger for Nick and Cole if Doc is not exactly that best fit? They've got a lot of options at their disposal, and they might turn into, we mentioned the name of Ristolainen in the last episode. They might turn that glut of forwards and into help on defense. That's a possibility too.
But
it's when you have too many guys.
I think getting a right shot D should be their number one priority. If they're going to get anyone, that's who they should get is a right shot D. And so that's
because usually we talk. There's this expression of quality control. In this case, they need quantity control.
They need quantity control. Yeah, I think that should be the name of the episode.
Okay,
that'll be the name of the episode. Quantity control. Okay. That's good.
All right. So, anything else to add? Otherwise, I think we've covered what we wanted to cover. Canadiens are hosting the Washington Capitals.
This was a very rambly podcast. We rambled in many different directions. This did not go the way we planned, but
no,
we got to the finish line. And I think, listen, we have one more episode before the trade deadline. That'll be Monday. I'll be in San Jose recording that one, and then it's deadline. And so, we will have an episode at some point on deadline day. We have to figure out when that's going to happen, but still, I think there's going to be. I think they have something up their sleeves. I feel like there's something that's going to happen, and I think maybe it might just be alleviating the quantity. It might be the quantity control that happens. It might just be Laine finding a home for Laine, but I can't help but think, an NHL season, you invest so much in an NHL season that when you have a big long-term plan, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that every season itself is worth some investment when you have an opportunity to do something that season. Even if it's not part of your long-term plan, at some point you got to just realize and acknowledge the fact that, okay, here we are. We're right in the thick of it. We're amongst all these teams. If we finish second or even third in the division, we have a first-round opponent that we can feasibly be beaten. And then and exactly what we talked about the last episode. And then all of a sudden this group's in the second round of the playoffs and a huge learning opportunity opens up. Everything changes. This is a new experience for basically everyone on the team except for Newhook, really. I can't think of someone else. Yeah, that's basically it. What can we do to capitalize on this situation, even though we didn't plan for this year to be the year that we add at the deadline? Sometimes you just got to step back, reassess the situation, and say, can we do something that will not deviate from our plan, but will still help us get the most out of this situation as we possibly can?
Yeah, just push the ball forward, because you can always make moves that are going to bolster, empower, and provide more opportunities to the core players that you're counting on. It's not just changing stuff; it's just helping them, adding layers to their experience, so that when their true window will open, you won't say, okay, well, now they're good and they need to learn how to win. They need to learn how to face tough situations in the face-offs. Well, and to their credit, I think the Canadiens have done a great job doing that. I mean, very rarely do you see a rebuilding team that doesn't take a step back in year 2, 3, or 4 or whatever. It's been a continuously, upward trend for the Montreal Canadiens. So they I think that they deserve a lot of credit for that, and maybe that's what they're keeping in mind a week from the deadline, is that they're in a position to continue to do so.
Yeah, and so I think depending on how the market shapes up, it's hard not to get the impression that the Canadiens are just like abjectly opposed to bringing in a rental. I guess what I'm saying is, if the right rental comes up at the right price for like a mid-round draft pick, like, why wouldn't you do that? How would that derail the plan in any way, shape, or form? It's if it helps the team currently, obviously, but that's just an example of something that seems to be something that the Canadiens are philosophically opposed to at this stage of their rebuild, that maybe they need to consider as we get closer to the deadline. Are there Thomas Vanek situations out there where there's a guy who's just sitting there and there's a team desperate to get something for him? Can you swing a third round pick for that hyper competitive bottom six winger that we were talking about, you know?
Yeah. Or yeah, it could be that. I mean, in a different situation, different environment where, you know, the Columbus Blue Jackets were not as competitive or on the brink, you know, to me, Boone Jenner is an interesting rental. It's not a guy, because of his injury and his history, it's not a guy that I would sign long term. But, you know, while he's healthy now, that would have been that would be an attractive ad if they were to choose to go into that you know, the rental route. But again, I'd be surprised if they did. But there are all sorts of guys that are available. Maybe, you know, there's a bunch of interesting players available. We'll see.
Teddy Bluger.
Yeah, but again, Teddy Bluger, yes, if you had not traded for Philippe Danault already. How many bottom six center do you want?
We just finished saying how Danault has been somewhat underwhelming in that role. I mean, I'm just saying.
But I think he's still better than Teddy Bluger. It's just that Teddy Bluger has always been Teddy Bluger, whereas Philippe Danault once was more than the Philippe Danault that he is today. But even today, I think he's a superior player. But we'll see. Who knows? Mason Marchment. There could be so many guys. Maybe that we could touch on that on Monday. If they were to explore the rental route.
We'll do a little shopping list for them on Monday. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be fun. All right. Yeah. So in the meantime, if you have comments, don't hesitate to drop them in the chat. But that goes without saying because you guys are so involved on our chat.
Yeah, but for those of you who are not subscribed to the podcast, you should know that there's a vibrant chat community on our Substack where you get to like exchange with fellow subscribers. The game day thread gets lots of action, and so those are people who are paid subscribers to the podcast who get both episodes of the podcast. So if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, consider doing so. BasuandGodin.com. One of the biggest perks of your subscription is having access to the chat. Frankly, I mean, yes, you get access to our other episode, but I'd say it's equally valuable to have this constant access to a community of Canadiens fans who discuss every single possible thing going on in the NHL and how it relates. What does this mean for the Canadiens? Should be the name of the chat on our Substack.
How does this relate to the Canadiens?
How does this affect the Canadiens? should be what it's called. So if you're not a subscriber to the podcast, it's a lot of fun in there. It's just high levels of engagement, and it's overwhelmingly respectful and polite. Everything that social media positive. Isn't. Yeah, it's a very positive environment. So I would strongly consider joining. Frankly, just for that, yes, you get our Monday episode in full, but that is something that you get access to all week long, and it's a really vibrant and positive environment. So, but anyhow, thanks for listening. I love them too. I love our chat. It's the best. So,
all right, Arpin, let's wrap it up. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you again on Monday.